And we're live with our 262nd episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on social media, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on social media. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. We are really excited today to have Ariel with us and to dig into her background, the places that she's been working. We've been running in very similar circles for a while, so it's going to be great to see what she's up to. And we have all sorts of questions about auditing and Crocs and socks, at least from my perspective, right? Like from a Datadog. Yeah, when we dig into it, we can get there. We can get there. Before we dive too far into things, first up, Ken and I have our Practical Secure Code Review with Generative AI course, virtual course that happens tomorrow, right? Tomorrow and Thursday, we will be running that training course for anyone that is interested. We do have a couple of slots left available. So go to training.absoluteappsec.com if you are interested in registering. Just, we know it's last minute at this point, but we did want to provide that ability for anyone that can make it. So training.absoluteappsec.com. Besides that, this episode is sponsored by Cloud Security Partners, your partner in dealing with modern risk. Cloud Security Partners works with customers to ensure that their cloud solutions are architected with security in mind. Talk to them today and mention Absolute AppSec for a complimentary cloud maturity review. While you're at it, check out their podcasts, Cocktails in Cloud and Relating to DevSecOps. Mike and the team over at Cloud Security Partners have been great to work with in the past. I can't say enough about them, so thanks to them for sponsoring. Besides that, Ken, you just got back from Global AppSec San Francisco. Is there... I guess we can get into that in a little bit, but is there anything else that's on your plate that you think that we should mention before we introduce Ariel and go from there?
I'm sure that there are things we should mention, but at the moment, I have no idea. There were some good talks from what I could hear and sneak away from the booth long enough, but I don't really want to get into that now because we've got Ariel on the call or on the show. So, nope, nothing to really mention other than, got a great guest today. So, yeah.
Yes. So with that, Ariel, let's dig into it. Ariel is currently at Datadog, correct?
Yes.
And is helping run the security efforts over there. Would you just give us a quick rundown on what your current position is? I know there's been a switch recently, right? Like we were talking about Twilio and the team that was over there and moving to Datadog, but let us know what you're doing over there. And then I'm sure we're going to have more questions for you from there.
Yeah, I currently lead the AppSec practices team at Datadog, and it's mainly so you don't confuse us with our application security product team that Datadog also offers. And so that means helping with secure by default programs, secure by design through threat modeling, secure code training with our engineers, and then ensuring we have visibility across a lot of the metrics that we're ingesting when it comes to vulnerabilities and risks.
Cool. Okay, so is that division then? So application security, you've got sorry, I'm like stumbling over here today. Application security product team versus application security. What did you call it again?
Practices, and it's the internal kind of classic AppSec team.
Okay, so that's your classic AppSec team, and I take it the product team is more kind of product security, like what we would traditionally think of as building security into the product, or what is the difference there?
Slightly different, because I think when you think of a product security team, they're building out security features, but this application security team is building out like an application security product. Like they're building out static analyzers, they're building out an ASM, and so that means we do get to dog food a lot of these cool like products and features.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, that's why I wanted to clarify, because I knew there was a lot of like externally facing like application security needs or products coming out of Datadog. And so like the traditional kind of prodsec versus AppSec may have not applied. How have you found that so far to be able to dog food some of that new stuff that's coming out of that other team? Yeah, just from an AppSec, like, hey, we're practitioners perspective.
It's been really great for us. I don't really need to fight for a budget for a specific tooling because another team is already creating it, and we can influence a lot of the different features that come out of it. One that we're really excited to integrate with is scorecard. So very similar to like I think Monocle that Chime had offered is you have a scorecard. We have a very similar feature. So we're still kind of working within staging and making some changes to the scorecard itself, but it means we get to really influence that as a product. And the things that we like to use internally, we can promote and say like, hey, this is something we should continue to invest in as a business.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm actually just digging through the security page on Datadog HQ or .com right now. So I was kind of looking at the different services that are being offered, right? Like, or the different application security tools. Like, are there any of those that you find to be like you mentioned the security card scorecard stuff that's just coming up, but are there others that you're excited about or that like you find to be really useful, I guess, stepping into it?
A lot of it is just like they'll replace like classic tools that an AppSec team have. So like a static analyzer. So they're still working things out. I think the ones that I'm super excited about are the ones where generally you have to like fight for the budget because there isn't a compliance need. And so like it's really easy to get a static analyzer approved within your budget, but getting something like scorecard, oftentimes you have to find an engineer to build out on your team, or you have to figure out like, how do we budget this out? But if it's already within our product, I can say, very cool, we'll use this. And we've had some other discussions around threat models. For instance, a lot of times threat models happen within a Google Doc, but they're not really auditable. It's really hard to extract text from those Google Docs. So one other kind of products that we have is called like Datadog Notebooks, and that's within the product itself. And we use a lot of the different products that we have for kind of our internal purposes. So looking at that as an avenue, it makes it so that I don't really have to think about, do I have to pay for this? It's, hey, let's actually just explore this and see if this works for us and make that decision, not really have to think about the financial aspect of things.
Well, I mean, that sounds ideal.
Yeah, I was just going to say, though, as the other side, as somebody who sells a security product, oh my gosh, yeah, I can see the pain points of trying to ever shim in something into like that. Yeah, you don't have an existing compliance need for, or a budget that's already carved out. It very, very difficult with universally across the board. It's like, why do we need that? And then budgets being very tight right now, usually anyways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's
we had a long
these
discussion
like extra add-ons.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's always the added value, right? And like, I'm always fascinated. I don't know, Ken can speak to this too, right? Like from like an auditing and audit log perspective, right? Like I'm always fascinated with what can actually be accomplished, right? Just from a stream of activity that's going on, whether it's internal to an application or whatever else. I mean, I get made fun of all the time, right? Like that auditing is my favorite, like security control. Yes, here we go with the auditing talk. That's right. Yep. Hey, we have Ariel on from Datadog. What do you want me to talk about, right? But where you are doing traditional like AppSec style things, like you're dog fooding Datadog at that point, right? Like you're pushing data in, and you've also had experience up to this point. And we haven't necessarily talked about your origin story. I do want to get into that shortly. But before we get there, right, like what if any differences do you see in how you handle logging, how you handle, those controls from a Twilio to a Datadog? Like, are there differences that you've noted?
I think it's still really early on, just 4 months in, to see if there are kind of any big difference in how we treat data. I know that we just have a lot more functionality when it comes to the different like security features we have. There's another Datadog product out there called like SDS, which is Sensitive Data Scanner, that we use internally to retract. It basically takes like a black marker and redact sensitive information. It's meaning like regexible. There's like some limitations, but that's a tool that we can often use when someone wants to process sensitive data within a threat model that before I didn't have access to. It's that when I'm providing a secure recommendation during a threat model, I'm not telling the developer, these are the best practices, figure out how you're going to implement that. I can attach kind of a product or a feature that they can use, and it makes their jobs a lot easier because they just know, okay, turn on SDS versus, oh, I need to figure out how do I handle all of this sensitive data. So there are benefits to having a company that's producing a lot of these features for us to consume within kind of security best practices.
Yeah. I mean, it does sound a lot like the model that, I mean, Ken, when you were over at GitHub, right, the ability to actually use those internal tools to enhance your product security practice or the AppSec practice in and of itself. I mean, like from a consulting perspective, like I step into it and, cost is always that huge issue, especially when I'm dealing with a lot of like small to mid-sized companies, right? Like they will have only a very limited amount that they can spend on any of these, but I do see them using somebody like Datadog or, they are using that for observability from a development perspective, but often forget that there is a security aspect to that can be extremely useful in like attack detection and other things that I see in the platform. And so, I mean, I think that's where I get excited about it, is because there is so much that you can tell. And Datadog does seem to be pushing that envelope, right? But okay, so on the flip side, right? Like, let's talk about you personally, and then I mean, I'm sure we'll get back to Datadog and auditing because I can't not talk about it. But where did you start? Like, how did you get into it? Because I mean, we've talked about Twilio and Datadog, but how did you get into security in general? What is your origin story?
Yeah, it was just randomly. My first job out of college was for a kind of pen testing firm of a consulting firm that did a lot of audits. And so it gave me a lot of exposure to the different types of pen tests that exist. There was like web app, mobile app, did one social engineering assessment, a lot of like network assessments. And I found myself liking the application security space. Didn't really like that I would give like this pen test report. I'd do the same exact pen test next year, and those findings never decreased because engineers didn't have the resources or the actual support to remediate those findings, or they would just kind of fix one location, but there are a lot of other instances like cross-site scripting everywhere else that they just didn't have the funding to really build out their security team. And so then I joined One Medical, where I was on their application security team, primarily focused on mobile security there because they have a mobile app. So they had Android and iOS, which was really exciting to work with their mobile guild. And then switched over to Segment because I really wanted to work with folks like Colleen, Jeevan, Eric, and Leaf. I had seen their talks everywhere, and I wanted to learn how do I integrate that into my career. I see them doing all that stuff, and it to me was just a mystery how they got all of that done within just like the same amount of hours that I have in a day. So wanted to work with them. Super exciting. And then Twilio at the time had acquired Segment. We were separate, but then like somehow became a Twilio employee through that. And then just recently joined Datadog.
Nice. So,
Yes.
yeah. Ken,
But how
sorry,
did
you
you
were gonna say
get?
something.
But how? Well, no, I was gonna say like like how did you get into pen testing specifically? Like, what was your? Did you know that was gonna be your career? Or like, no, you just.
It really
Okay.
was. I needed a job. A lot of student loans. This was a job that came up, and I was like, "Cool, I'll move to Dallas, Texas, from California for this job." And the first 10 days, they sent me to an onboarding in Atlanta, Georgia, where they taught us how to use Excel and how to speak to customers, and like a bunch of things about audit that I was like, "Did I become an accountant for some reason?" Like I was so confused, and it's. This company just had a pen testing arm within their consulting services, but truly random. It was like my title was like security and privacy consultant, and I was like, cool, that sounds like a job.
So were they? So when they brought you to Atlanta, was that for soft skills, like for everybody? like kind of soft skills
All
building, or
new
was that?
hires go through this onboarding. And so they had a bunch of different sessions to just give you like general training. I learned a lot about VLOOKUP and index match, which I use quite often. So I was very grateful for that, because before that, I didn't know what those two very useful Excel functions were. But yeah, it was like just a random job out of college.
Oh, you just okay. So then, how was the experience? Like, so I assume at this point, what did you go to college for? Was it computer science or was it something else? Yeah,
Computer science, yeah.
Because I assumed as much. That's why I figured. But to clarify, so then, so you're here. You've got the comp sci background, and now you're moving into security. What were your thoughts like in the first few months of kind of going down this route as a fresh, fairly fresh out of college? It sounds like individual.
There was a lot of studying, because I think I had joined in September and they'd enrolled me into a SANS course like 2 months in. And then there was an internal, very similar, it's like a baby OSCP exam that they make you take before you hit a year at the company, and then studying for the OSCP after. So my first thought was just like, I need to pass all of these exams. There was a lot of just learning to just understand kind of this org, but it's super exciting. I felt like there was a lot of instant gratification when it came to pen testing, where I would learn something within my SANS course, and then I can immediately apply it to a pen test that I was on, which I thought was better than the lab environment, because I had just real world exposure of, okay, here's what the different types of cross-site scripting is. And then I could see a cross-site scripting vulnerability the next day at work. So I just remember being like, I just graduated from college. Why am I still taking more exams? Why am I still having nightmares about failing a midterm? And now it's like failing a certification where it like costs a lot of money to retake it. What happened? I thought I had graduated. Like, did I not graduate? So a lot of learning, but I was kind of happy, like retrospectively, that I just got to keep learning and stay in that like learning habit or like discipline, because it's something that if you don't continue to do year after year, it's really easy to forget how to learn. And I also got to figure out, how do I best learn within, like, I control the timeline of when I take the exam. I realize like doing all-nighters aren't a great idea. So how do I undo some of those bad habits and then apply that to learning? But it was just found a job. The job happened to be in security, and it was something that I actually really enjoyed learning about, and that I actually found myself like feeling more like gravitated towards, this is actually a field I want to be in, versus like software engineering was not something I was super interested in. I had graduated with a degree but didn't want to get into coding, so wanted something adjacent, and that's why this job had appealed to me.
Why not get into coding out of curiosity? Just what, like building software, just like on
it
sprints
never
and whatnot. Never appealed. That's fair. I think it is a different mindset between the two. I figured to clarify though. So I was never.
It really never appealed to me, and it was having to like finish these programs till like midnight and staying in like our computer. Like, I was just like, this, I can't imagine this being my full-time job. But pen testing till midnight was something where I was like, I can see this being my full-time job. It is so much easier to critique someone's work than to build my own. Like, it's so much easier. This is a significantly better job. And I felt really happy that just randomly I had found this job. And this was for like all throughout college. I really disliked my major, but it was like a sunk cost at that point. I could not switch majors. Was going to be too in debt to major in anything else. And so when I did switch over and like found pen testing, I was like, this is super exciting. And there are so many more verticals that I could go with pen testing, because it just opened a lot of I didn't know that this field existed. I think the first time someone told me that they were going on a social engineering assessment, I was like, oh yeah, like people say social engineering as like an official term, like that's a term of art. I thought it was just like a joke to be like, oh, I'm going to socially engineer someone, not knowing that that was someone's job. So it was very exciting. I felt very lucky to have found it. and then to pivot into AppSec and found that like, oh, I do really enjoy this. The fact that I was exposed to what AppSec was really early on, I think was really beneficial for kind of career satisfaction.
Yeah.
I think one unique question that you might be able to answer, if it's not too controversial, or maybe you don't even have examples, but it sounds like this company is investing basically a lot in qualified candidates or people that meet some sort of whatever their qualifications are for, like, you seem like somebody that we could invest in, and then you would, be a productive member of our company. Did you, assuming that's true, did you ever see any other, candidates or hires who had the same level of investment, but maybe didn't flourish in that role? And if you did, were there, or maybe a better way to phrase this is, were there attributes of the people that succeeded, or what were the attributes of people basically that succeeded in, learning, getting up to speed, and were there folks who didn't have success, and were there common attributes amongst those folks as well? I don't know how to really phrase this super well. Hopefully that the gist of my question comes across.
So I think there's like so many different factors to know like who is successful and who is not successful. It's really hard to define success, or I think like career satisfaction. It's really hard to see that on LinkedIn. When I first joined, it was me joining a team of 10 guys who kind of had roots in Texas versus I didn't have any roots in Texas. So I felt a lot of dissatisfaction with this role. And I did not think I was going to succeed in this role. So in fact, I actually quit this job before having another one lined up because I was like, this is not the company for me. So I didn't really keep up with what's happening with a lot of the people there, but I felt that as a new hire or like a new grad where you don't know a lot about the kind of the different fields within security or the types of roles that you can have, this was a really great way to just get exposure to a lot of the different types of security teams that exist within a company and the different types of security work that you can do. And that if you really wanted to, you could really take this and do a lot more. And I've seen some people who've really done like great things outside of like they'll go into pen testing, like join like Spectre Ops, or I think one of them like joined Coinbase and did a lot of work then. I think eventually started a startup. So it was just a very, to me, like great way to introduce people to just here's a lot of information, do with it what you want, and here's training and resources, which I think are really important early on, where you hear about some folks where they'll say like, oh, like I've never been approved for a SANS course. And so they won't even be able to form the opinions on if they like a SANS course or not, because one of the things I did at Twilio was a strong opinions only, where it was a series where we chatted about the different types of certifications and higher learning avenues that you can go. And it is to get access to that information of, is this something that you want to do? Is this something that you're interested in? And not there be like this financial or this like approval barrier, I think was really, really great for me really early on. And I can see that being really great for others as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to flip this, what attributes do you feel have helped you in your career to go from, hey, I'm just figuring this out, to like, I mean, you're well respected and you've obviously done some pretty awesome things. So like what, I know it's hard to brag about yourself, right? It's basically what I'm asking you to do, but what attributes do you find have set you apart or helped you excel, or however you want to phrase it?
I think I'm a very competitive person. So I do see myself and I look at my peers and I want to make sure that I'm keeping up with them. And I think that can also be a negative trait where I'm always looking over my shoulder. And that's something where I'm trying to get better at, like, how do I be satisfied with my career and the goals and opportunities in front of me? Especially with LinkedIn, it's really hard not to see what others are posting. But yeah, I can be really competitive at times. And that meant when you're putting like a pass and a fail in front of exam, it's really clear to me, how do I win? How do I succeed? And so when you put just a bunch of exams in front of me, I see those as like opportunities to like win and compete. And that was always really exciting to me. The other piece is that my competitive side does come from doing public speaking in high school. So did speech and debate all throughout high school and then coached in college. And I felt that being able to converse about like different types of topics to different types of audiences, talk about risk and impact, those were things that really helped me, whether it was writing a pen test report and having to kind of write out the impact of these different types of vulnerabilities. That was something that was really easy for me and something I really enjoyed doing. Or speaking in front of a large audience about a vulnerability management program. That's something I really enjoy doing. And I felt that that specific skill has really accelerated my career.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Seth, you and I have talked about this, by the way, before. It's gone by different names. Sometimes the name is anxiety, sometimes it's competitiveness, but it's that thing where, like, yeah, we've had pretty private, candid conversations about like, does that? It's hard because everybody I know who is doing pretty well has that thing, right? That's like, I have
That
to move
drive.
forward. I
Yeah.
have to do. I'm not doing enough, and it can be like a balance to not let the negative aspect overtake the positive sort of outcomes that it produces. And Seth, I mean, you fill in some flavor here with your take on it, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's interesting to hear you talk about it, Ariel, because like we've had a lot of discussions about what it takes to be successful, right? Like, and success can take many forms. But a lot of people that are in the industry, I feel you from a LinkedIn perspective, because I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing, right? To actually go and like view the LinkedIn feed. Because a lot of times, like I see things that are popping up and I'm always like, man, I'm not doing enough, right? Like, or, I'm not getting enough interaction, or, right? Like, oh yeah, that's awesome that we've got some really interesting research that's coming out. Like, what have I produced lately that's on that same level, right? Like that constant comparison is difficult. And a part of that goes back to what you're saying about like, hey, like getting into a penetration test or getting into like some sort of AppSec assessment, you find vulnerabilities and you get this dopamine hit from it, right? And it like I'm constantly seeking that dopamine hit, right? Like whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's a penetration test, whether it's a code review or a threat model, like being to identify that flaw, that one like puzzle piece that makes everything fit together feels so good, in your brain to actually figure that out. That I feel like that's where it kind of comes from. And I don't understand. I have a hard time relating to people that don't have that same sort of drive or instilling that drive in others, right? It's kind of an intrinsic things that he seems to come about. And I don't, again, I'm not sure exactly where it comes from, but obviously like it has helped you in your career, right? So, but I did want to ask about the public speaking in general, right? Like how you got involved there, the, like how is it that you first started speaking, right, like in the industry? Because I mean, we've seen quite a few things. I've seen you run panels and other things. Like what is it that got you to that point and how did you actually get started?
So when I'd first joined the pen testing lab, they were really kind of big advocates of Twitter, and they're like, security Twitter is a thing, you have to look into it. And you would start to see these like prominent individuals, and then you could look through LinkedIn as well, and then I could start to see all of these different talks. And so that made me really exciting that to be successful in this industry, I'd have to build a personal brand, and that I'd have the opportunity to speak publicly if I had something to talk about. But for the first couple of years, I felt like I'm not really working on anything that deserves kind of attention. And so I did get some nudging when I switched over to One Medical from my manager. She provided a lot of different opportunities, and there are like really great conferences like Day of Security where it gives like young women the opportunity to speak, and I feel like it's less intense. And so I would kind of chat about mobile security, had a couple of different talks. And then when I joined Segment, it was when I was like, this was the secret sauce that I was looking for. This is how they do, like they build their personal brand while working a full-time job. It's that it's part of it, that every month that they would kind of review all of the different events that are coming up and submit CFPs or promote their work or promote others' work, or every couple of weeks they're spending time building out their blog. And so just getting exposure to this is how they finally, like, this is how they integrate it into their schedule, and this is how they balance it all. That was really kind of helpful for me. And it also was building accountability. There are other folks who want me to do this type of work. They're pushing on me to kind of deliver, to submit a CFP, or to chat with folks and help moderate a panel, or introducing me to folks that are going to be on a panel. So that really helped. It was the networking, the accountability, and just the visibility into how you make this a part of your job, because it wasn't so obvious to me from the outside looking in how they're able to do everything.
Yeah. And I mean, that's really good advice, right? To make it a part of your job. I know as I initially started my career, like I had very similar things. Like I was very reticent to be public about what I was doing on a daily basis, because I was like, well, no one's really going to care, right? Like, I'm working this like small aspect within a company, and seeing other people on LinkedIn, on Twitter, back in the day, like the research that was coming out was very interesting. And it evolved over time to, hey, guess what, right? Like I see an interesting article, I have something interesting to say about it. And just putting yourself out there a little bit and getting positive reactions from, other people in the industry, like whether it is people like you or Ken or, Leaf, like the team at Segment was always good. The team at Netflix for, those original years, right? Just having those conversations, it became, oh, there's other people that are doing the same thing that I am. And it doesn't have to be this like, 6-month, 1 year long research project that I'm talking about. It can be, guess what? I found this really interesting thing on a penetration test that was a weird edge case. People want to hear about that, right? Those were the interesting articles that I started to read, and then starting to generate your own content from that to build up your own brand, right? Like, but it still does take a little bit of a internal, I don't know, dialogue, or at least like a little bit of like put on some armor, because you never know what the responses are going to be, right? It's scary.
Or it's to get no response at all, right? It's like,
yeah.
I had a virtual talk and there was just absolute silence the entire time I'm giving the talk. And I'm generally looking for kind of any type of like social cues to know if I'm on the right path or not. And then any questions? Nope. For like 10 minutes, and they just kept the room open. And it was just the most excruciating feeling of, oh my God, like I spent all of this time and effort and no one's even mad. They don't even care. It meant nothing.
Yeah, that's the worst feeling. That is such a terrible feeling. And some of that's just, virtual can be like that. But
well, not only virtual, right? Like I like to tell people about, like, because SaintCon is coming up here in Utah, right? And I think I mentioned this last week again, but one of the first talks that I gave at SaintCon was very early days. SaintCon was a network analysis tool, and I mean, there's other, illusions that are going on because I am in Utah when we talk about SaintCon, but they wanted to start an AppSec track. This was very early days, like early 2010s. There wasn't a lot of developers that attended this conference. And so they had an AppSec track, and I spoke, I think, to 2 people in the room, right? Like that's pretty disheartening when it's a 600 person conference and there's another track going on. I'm like, what is going on? But who happened to be there as well in that room was Jason Chan from Netflix, also giving a talk, right? And it was like this great networking opportunity in the midst of this larger conference. And I'm like, these people didn't realize like the network side of things, what was going on in the AppSec side. Now, like that's not the same anymore, but you don't want to discount those opportunities, because people are there and listening that you probably respect, and you just don't realize who it is that's actually in that room.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's happened. I mean, that's happened to me too, by the way. I just want to say, like, I have even given one training to one person. Do you remember this, Seth? At AppSec Cali in, I don't know what year. And it was on, because nobody cared about Ruby on Rails security at that time, but one person did. And it ended up being really valuable. and ended up continuing a discussion with that person, and it was great. But yeah, I literally sat next to one person, probably the best training you'll ever get, just sitting right next to them. And who cares? Sometimes that's super valuable in its own way. Anyways,
But
sorry. So
to that point,
Seth?
yeah, to that point, right? Like I want to say you shouldn't discount it, but you should also realize that the audience, like those opportunities, right? Like of where you're speaking and who you're speaking to is also a learning opportunity, right? So like for SaintCon, then it became a wider discussion with the organizers of that conference of how do we actually make AppSec a bigger thing when it comes to this conference? Because obviously the attendees are not as concerned with that, at least that current set. But nowadays there's a pretty thriving community. And so it was like, okay, let's start to build that up. Or should I go some other place? Should we be talking at a developer conference as opposed to a network security conference? Hey, probably if we're going to talk about code security, that's going to be a more interesting play. And the same thing goes for, hey, you're posting on Twitter. Guess what? Maybe people don't see that, or there's other places that we should be promoting, or I should be posting on LinkedIn, or maybe on Medium, or other avenues. Just take it as a learning opportunity, I guess, is what I'm getting at there. It shouldn't necessarily always be a negative, even though it feels like it at the time.
Yeah, and I think that's why having cheerleaders and people to support you is really helpful early on, because it's really scary. It's just a natural feeling to feel rejected or to feel kind of like, I'm not gonna do this anymore. That failed. I got the feedback that like no one's listening. I'm gonna stop. But having other people tell you you're on the right path, the way you see it is like, yeah, there wasn't a lot of feedback this time, but next time we can take that and try to work on different things, or keep trying and seeing what works. It was having that type of support system through like the managers and the folks I knew at both One Medical and Segment Twilio. That was really, really helpful to me, because sometimes I'm like, that didn't go so well. I want to stop. I don't want to do that again. But like putting yourself out there again and again, that to me it was always because of the people who supported me and told me to keep going.
So what would you be your recommendation to management, to people that are in like those like support roles? Like, how do you support someone that is getting started?
I think it's just to be their cheerleader, right? To say like, you're on the right path. Like it's okay to kind of have these like failures because you learn from them, or to also say that wasn't a failure, that actually went super, super well, depending on the situation. But yeah, to keep trying. I think that is super exciting for me as a manager to cheerlead the people that I work with, to ensure that if there's a goal that we're going to get there together, and they're not necessarily alone in achieving that goal. Because there are times when you do feel alone and you're just like, not going to work on that anymore. But it's like, no, this is a really great idea to have someone to like bounce off ideas and to like get rid of some of those nerves before you do deliver and execute on that goal.
Yep. Good. Cool. Let's see. Next question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ken.
Sorry. No, at some point I do want to get into the 6 years in review talk, that because I'm only looking at I'm saying that because I'm looking at the clock right now, and we've only got like 20
I guess that's true.
minutes left. Yeah. And no, because so just to kind of set this up too, like I sat in on your talk, was incredibly impressed. It was really comprehensive. And again, it was 6 years in review on how you all created a culture of people that actually care about security. There's a lot of points that we can pick out and talk about, but if you don't mind kind of summarizing more comprehensively the talk and the experience that you were covering there, in this presentation. It was really, honestly, it was one of the best ones I had seen there. That's why I really, really wanted to cover this.
Thank you. So wonderful opportunity to speak at B-Sides SF about a vulnerability management program that had started at Segment and had worked really well. The kind of couple of key changes was that engineers own risk. And what that meant is that they were explicitly called out as risk owners. They also had self-service due date extensions. And ultimately, it created this program where engineers were embracing risk. And this program worked really, really well at Segment. And when we tried to extend this to Twilio, which had kind of a different experience with security and a different relationship with vulnerability management, it didn't really work. And it was figuring out how we kind of got through some of those pain points to really do deliver something that we were really proud of and that we saw a lot of success in.
So, and going into that, let's talk about some of the friction points that, if you don't mind, starting with some of the friction points that Segment had in sort of the beginning of this journey, or things they'd experienced. But then also like the Twilio, obviously being a very different situation, what they also experienced previously, and then how you overcame sort of getting them on board, basically, because political capital is like one of the hardest things to build internally in a company. It's arguably one of the most important, if not the most important thing that you do. So that's why I think this is like a really relevant topic.
So I believe there wasn't a vulnerability management program before Eric had built this. And so I think there's a big difference when you go from 0 to 1 versus 1 to 2, where there was nothing and they were creating something. They had the political capital to get this built. You would see the difference in the primers that we had shared out. So Eric had shared out a vulnerability management primer, sent it out to the engineering org, and there was a lot of feedback. People really cared to share some of that feedback and say, I really like this idea, or what if we change this? And then when I had sent out my vulnerability management primer, there were no reactions, or it was like 5 Slack reactions and 1 was an intern. And the other 4 were all security people. And so it was exactly kind of like getting no reaction at all was like, I failed. Like no one cares. And so getting people to care, and it wasn't because they were purposely trying not to care or ignoring me. It was they didn't have the time. We needed to create awareness for a really large company in which there's a lot of noise. Sending out a Slack message doesn't work anymore the way it would have at a smaller company. And so a lot of times Eric was iterating on these problems, and it was super easy to iterate, to make a change to a variable because he had admin access in Jira and because these changes affected a smaller set of groups. Didn't have admin access at Twilio, and making one change meant that it was going to affect like hundreds of engineers, and that we'd have to go through some sort of approvals process, or we'd have to get buy-in from different folks. It was a lot more of a complicated process to do that. And so it was this, I thought it was a really cool experiment to see, here's this one program that we're not going to really change a lot. Like the core components are the same. Does it really scale? Because we've had going from, I think like Segment was like 400 or 600, and then Twilio was about 6,000. It was the ultimate scale test, in my opinion, that I could take one program and try to plop it over and see if it scales. And we saw some pain points in adapting to that to ensure that we believe that this will work, that this is the only way for us to drive down risk, is if each engineer embraces risk. And the way we do that is, one of the ways is through a vuln management program. It's the way that they're interfacing most often with security. How do we make it so that it's something that they enjoy, that they felt that they had accountability, and that they can really kind of make some of the changes that they need to without having all these barriers and tickets and gates that would prevent them from being able to do that.
Yeah, and on that note, like, because that's actually that's a talk that I've seen over and over again, is around like just variations of, I have a ton of bugs or tickets, or what do you want to call it, however you want to call them, vulnerabilities, whatever. Here's how we manage that like, here's how we wrangle tickets, basically. And I thought what was a little bit, meaning like security, like, actually the way that they're actually managing just them, not like democratizing, which I want to get to. And so, yeah, you see this like thing over, and then, like some people end up buying platforms Seth and I have talked about this. We end up buying all these platforms to try and manage all these vulnerabilities. I don't think that that's the most optimal way to handle this. I think almost those platforms can sometimes be a symptom of an underlying problem. But yeah. I like the idea of democratizing vulnerability management. So can you speak a little bit to that and how you all went about implementing this?
So the big difference, like what democratized vulnerability management means, is that we all share risk. I think I had a clearer definition in the talk. And one of the points I had made was that if you were to just take all of the different features that we had at Segment and at Twilio and just like put it on a platform that a team can purchase and then just like threw it at the team, it would actually fail. And we saw that at Twilio, where I'd called it in the talk like a Hydra, but the original idea was like, it's become this Frankenstein's monster where you just like chopped up these features, glued it together on this monster, and now it's attacking everyone. And that's what it really felt like, because it really was that there needed to be this cultural shift, that you couldn't just turn this platform on and expect all of your vulnerabilities to go down by like annoying engineers with the amount of noise. That you needed to get that leadership buy-in to say that this is something that they're going to prioritize on, right? Like they're not getting this extra engineering time out of nowhere. It's also a muscle. So to expect all of like, if you had 1,000 vulnerabilities, for that to get down to 0 within a year, it's a really big ask of engineers who haven't built that muscle before. And so finding different ways to create awareness for it, this is something we should focus on. This is how you can make these like recommendations easier for engineers to digest. There are a lot of different kind of small things that add up in order to make this a culture where we trusted engineers. That was a big one as well, of creating this culture of trust where we're not just saying like, okay, here's these red tickets, you have 5 days, 4 days, 3 days, 2 days to fix it, but really trusting engineers. And that's what we liked about the self-service due date extensions, was that engineers can decide when they would fix a ticket depending on the severity. There's some like pieces of, if it's a P1, a VP had to extend it. If it was a P2, it was a director. But all in all, to say that engineers just had a lot more kind of responsibility and accountability when it comes to their vulnerabilities. I think like Netflix's saying is it's a trust and responsibility, or there's some piece there of, we're not trying to control engineers and say, here's the compliance stick and use that to motivate them, but to convince them that this is something that's important to do. And that's all the way from the leadership to the staff engineers, or really vocal engineers, to all of the engineers that end up fixing those tickets. It requires a really big shift to say that this matters to the organization, versus just a compliance said this, so go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
For remediation, sorry, go ahead, Seth.
No, and like I was gonna step into that just a little bit, because I keep going back to my current lived experience of being a third party trying to help companies build out AppSec programs, right? And like this is a constant battle that we have. Is like I almost want to call it like the vulnerability backlog crisis, right? Because we have SCA tools, we have DAS tools, we have SaaS tools, all generating vulnerabilities on top of like the network security stuff that's going on, and the vuln scanning,
whatever,
containers and everything. And so I step into an organization and they're like, oh, we have 20,000 vulnerabilities that need to be remediated, and 4,000 of them are high or critical risk. And I'm like, okay, so how do you shift that focus without using that compliance hammer? Right. Because when I talk to the developers, they're always like, well, the product managers, they don't give us time to actually go fix any of this. It doesn't matter. Customers don't care. And of course, like, it's all about, the money or whatever else it is. And so what were the steps that you took to flip that discussion when it comes to that larger organization? Right. I mean, I know Segment was a very progressive organization when it came to the security side of things, right? Like we've talked with Eric and Leaf and Jivan over the years, right? Like it's been great to see how they've done things. And I compare them a lot to Netflix back in the day, and like the support that team was given. So as you expanded that out at Twilio, how did you shift that mindset? Like what steps did you take?
So it was always just like a sum of very small actions that amounted to something bigger, where, for instance, we had multiple vuln management systems. I think we had 3 or 4. And so saying, okay, here's the one that we use that's going to reduce the amount of just like engineering toil that exists when you have multiple systems. We had multiple severity ratings, standardizing that. And even before all of this was doing an assessment of what are all the different pain points that are going on. It's not just a mandate. Like if we had day one said, here's the mandate, you're going to focus on only critical vulnerabilities, I don't think we would have seen the success, because you wouldn't have had the kind of insight into why vulnerabilities weren't getting fixed and some of the problems that were preventing them from being able to focus just on their criticals. And so that was one of like going to the engineers and just like making sure we can standardize the system. The other was actually going to the engineers. Oftentimes they would just ignore our emails or our Slack messages. So going on a roadshow, which was very expensive, where we went to 32 business units and we talked to them about security. Oftentimes they were like, security just been ignoring us for years. You're the first person from security to talk with me, and we really appreciate you for taking the time to like tell us about what are the important changes. So we found that to be a really valuable tool.
Did you physically go? Is that what you're saying?
No, just like
okay.
amount of time, and for a global team meant that I was up really early and really late. And I did miss one meeting. So like in my mind, it was like very expensive in terms of time.
Okay. When you said expensive, I was like, wait, are you going to 32 different offices? That's like, I mean, that's cool, but that's intense. All right.
I would not sign it. Even virtually, that was so, because to coordinate all of that for us to show up to 32 different meetings within, I think, like a 3 or 4 week period, it was really time consuming. And you have to really engage with folks because you had different types of audiences. So that was one that we found a lot of success in that when the Slack messages stopped working, how do you adapt when there's just too much noise? And so trying to think through some of the other things we had done. But one thing we did do was like have an executive mandate to focus on criticals, and then to support engineers through that, dashboarding and metrics to kind of make it really clear what would really kind of push the vulnerability metrics to like where they needed to be at. It was all of those things together made it a lot easier for engineers to tackle the big vulnerabilities. I'm much more eloquent and detailed in the chat.
No. It's great, but I just wanted to call it, like the dashboarding. Would you call that the auditing of this, of the program? No, sorry.
Here we go again.
Yeah, exactly. So, but like I did want to pull out the key points that you just talked about, because there was a lot in there, right? Like executive management and executive buy-in is critical. I definitely see this, when I'm talking to like just the AppSec team or just the security team, and we're not talking to executives. It's very rare that they have a good, robust threat management, vulnerability management program. Very rare, right? So executive buy-in, and then I love that you're doing this analysis of pain points, right? Before you introduce anything, it's figure out where the team is at and then try to solve the problems. And I would go even further than just vulnerability management, but across the board of CI/CD tools, like actually like secure coding requirements, anything that has to do with the secure SDLC. If you don't meet the engineers where they're at, it's very unlikely that they're going to pick that up and run with it. At least in my experience. And it sounds like you were dealing with the same thing. And then finally, this like tweaking of the program over time, that like you are like what you come up with initially may look great on paper, but most likely it's not going to be the program that you end up with, and expecting it to be the program that you end up with is incredibly naive. Because, just having one manager in the engineering team swap, right, or change out is going to alter what that program looks like, because you don't know what that manager is going to respond to, and what the engineers are going to respond to on that team. And what works for one team may not work for another one. So flexibility is key in order to reduce that threat management. And I know I'm putting words in your mouth, but I just wanted to kind of call those points out there before we moved on.
So they're really important points because it's when I first started, I thought it would just take me a quarter to set this all up in Jira and be done with it. And it was the adoption that took a really, really long time. The building the social political capital that it was really interesting to see how different leaders had done that, of how they build it, how they yield it, how they build their allies, how they shield themselves from those who are not their allies. It was just like a very interesting lesson in how you navigate through these circumstances for a very political project where there are a lot of people who did not want to see this project get funded and executed, and then to see people turn a whole new leaf and see, oh wow, like this is how you get a project done. And it wasn't just one or two people, it was really a collection of efforts to really bring adoption to kind of 100% if you consider that we've rolled it out for the entire company.
Yeah. And I mean, that's pretty amazing when you think about the size of Twilio versus the size of Segment. And like, getting any sort of 100% coverage with that size of an organization is, kudos, right? Like it's promising to see. Because I go back to all the problems that I see dealing with engineers that have just given, or security engineers that have given up on the vuln management side of things. And they just kind of throw their hands up and they're like, well, the organization doesn't want it or doesn't respond. But when I go talk to the engineers, they're like, well, of course they don't want their product to be hacked, right? Like, of course they want to be secure. And so there's like this miscommunication that's going on. And I have a hard time, even as an outsider, not being negative in those situations because it's, like we can see from the outside where the gaps exist. I don't know what to tell people is really what it boils down to, outside of keep trying, don't give up, and have a short memory.
Continuing to cheerlead.
Yeah,
right? That's all it is.
It is. And
that was going to be actually a question I had. That was my last, because I know we're getting low on time.
Yeah, we're about
that
time.
Was going to be a question, is like every organization's unique, how you implement your programs, your tooling, your processes, all that's going to be very, very different. But it's over. If you could summarize, essentially, maybe any bullet point, high level, sort of like generic advice that probably could apply to anybody coming in, especially with a new program, like your AppSec #1, basically. And I know this is like really putting you on the spot, but is there kind of anything you can think of that would be, just like I said, like a bullet point, high level, sort of just generic advice that you could give folks as they're starting something like that out, that journey?
This has been something I've been thinking a lot about since I've just started kind of at Datadog and building out a new iteration of the AppSec program, where there are a lot of these like industry projects or programs like security champions, threat modeling, secure by defaults. And oftentimes I think to really get it to success, and I hope this is my hypothesis, it's really all about adoption. You can't just copy and paste this program. You have to really figure out how it can thrive within the current company. What are the constraints? What are the requirements? Who are your allies to really bring this to 100% adoption? So it's never just the idea. There's this one quote. It's like, when you make a decision, it's like 20% is making the decision, 80% is making sure it's the right decision. And I think that applies here with any AppSec program, right? Like 20% is like having a good idea, and 80% is really the execution and the adoption of that idea.
Yeah, it seems like you're really heavy on sort of listening. That's really what I've taken away a lot from this conversation, is that you're spending a lot of time listening to folks, asking pointed questions, or maybe they're vague, generic, but questions that relate to how are things going, how do you feel about the process, what could be better. And it just sounds like that's what you if I was to abstract something, it sounds like listening and asking questions, and making it about the people that you're providing a service for, which sounds obvious, but I've been Seth, you can attest to this. We've seen a lot of organizations. It's clearly not obvious in a lot of organizations. But anyways, that's a great strategy. for what it's worth. But Seth, I know we're running low on time, and you usually handle all that. So I don't wanna,
Yes. Yeah, we are. And we do want to be cognizant, Ariel. We're so thankful that you came on today. It's been a very interesting discussion. I mean, there's a lot to take away, especially as people are, building the programs out. Before we wrap things up today, like I did want to give you an opportunity, I know, Datadog, you're working at building a team there. Like, do you have anything that you would like to bring up associated with that?
We're hiring for 2 seniors remote within the US and then 1 security engineer 2 out of New York. So if you're interested in building secure by default, iterating on how we do threat modeling and think about threat modeling, secure code training, and how we capture metrics to ensure that we are successful in what we say we're doing, please apply. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll probably drop that in. There's a jobs channel in the AppSec Slack. So, if you want to send us over a link, or I can dig it out, we'll definitely promote it, because there are people we know that are looking, and it sounds like a great team and a great environment. So,
I was trying to find where the security ones are, but I think if you just
GIS, General Information Security, on the job page, I believe, because that's the org that we sit under. You should see the roles listed.
I found it. There's 3 I see. Does that sound about right?
I want to say they have like 200 roles posted, but for my team, just 2 postings. It's the senior application security engineer and then the security engineer 2 application security.
Okay. So if people have questions about that, where could they find you and interact with you?
LinkedIn. If you send me a question on LinkedIn, I'm usually pretty responsive towards messages.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll push people that direction. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for taking the time out of your day. We're very, just thank you for all of your insight and your talks and other things, and keep at it. It's exciting to see.
Thanks so much for having me.
And apply to Datadog if you're looking for an awesome position working with awesome people in application security. Perfect.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening today. We will see everyone online, and otherwise we'll see everybody next week.